Hello, good people. Welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Colonel takes control. In the last few episodes, we've seen Elvis travel to Hollywood, begin pre-production for Clambake, not have a very fun time of it. He's fallen in his own bathroom, hit his head, raised a knot the size of a golf ball. Doctors have come in. One brought a portable x-ray machine. They've examined Elvis's head, determined that he does not have a skull fracture. And we've been listening to different people tell this story and their viewpoints of it. And we're going to get back into that today. Hi, Keith. Hi, Linda. Hi, Gunn. Hi, Marion. Thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. We're going to get started with a song, and we're going to remember what Elvis was wanting to think about, what he truly wanted to think about. And what he was being pulled away from at the Circle G, and this is His Heart's Desire. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for joining. You're just in time.
His time came too early, the curtain fell too fast. Before he was ready, before we could grasp the man behind the myth, the ache behind the fame. He wanted something simple, not fortune, not acclaim. 6 is 3, the threats came down like rain. He spoke of love, not fear, through the shadow and the strain. I wanna live to be old, he said with quiet grace, to remember her love and see our children's face. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home, to be a good man with a heart that could rest, to know he was loved and he'd given it his best. No mansion in the sky, no diamond parade, just the warmth of a hand and the life they made. A whisper of laughter, a child's sleepy sigh, that was the dream he carried inside. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home, to be a good man with a heart that could rest, to know he was loved and he'd given his best.
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today, we're going to watch as the Colonel takes control. So let's catch ourselves back up to where we were. And thank you so much, everybody, for your praise for the song. I truly appreciate it. Hello, the Cali Girl LA. I don't remember seeing you here before, so welcome to the show. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And we're in the middle of the Elvis Presley 1967 crisis. We're talking about possible control that Colonel Parker's got over his career, and how this episode of Elvis falling, hitting his head, getting a concussion, it's a nexus within the Elvis stories to illustrate how the Colonel took advantage of Elvis when he was in a weakened condition. But we've seen the testimony from two of the top people who are pushing this narrative, Marty Lacker, Billy Smith, that they're both talking about a contract that mentions 50%. And let's just run through the calendar real quick. I've actually brought us a calendar from March of 1967 to help us visualize how this occurs over a span of days. And Keith is saying that his friend says that Priscilla talks about her time at the Circle G Ranch in her book, but he hasn't read it. Her first book, Elvis and Me? Yes. And we'll come to some of her memories. Especially once we return to the ranch after the wedding. And there's a honeymoon. But here in the calendar, Elvis returned to Hollywood, according to Gary Pepper, who knew the number of the flight that he took and what time he left Graceland, because Gary Pepper was at Graceland with his mother, and they stayed and they talked to Grandma Dodger, Minnie Mae. So Elvis's grandma had a nickname of Dodger, but her real name was Minnie Mae. And Gary, Elvis's friend since December, Christmas, 1957. He and his mother stayed and they comforted Minnie Mae because she was sad that Elvis was once again traveling across the country. And that happened on March 5th, which is a Sunday, as you can see on the calendar. And Keith's saying that his wife loves the show too. Thank you so much, Keith. And she has left a few comments, and I definitely appreciate them. And on Monday the 6th, Elvis reported to wardrobe for the first day of pre-production of Clam Bake. Now, we also have to remember, Clam Bake has been delayed. Elvis has delayed it twice. He managed to push back when he was supposed to be in California by recording in Nashville. And there were some issues with him recording at Nashville. And then he delayed coming to California again because he had saddle sores. And Dr. Nick wrote a letter that Colonel Parker was able to use to prove that Elvis had a medical condition and could not travel at that time. So now Elvis is reporting on Monday, March 6th, but we're already delayed into the production. And that's costing somebody money. But everything's okay now because Elvis is here and they're ready to get started. And Keith is letting us know that he was referring to the book Elvis and Me, which was written by Priscilla, published in the early 1980s. And so on Monday, Elvis is at the wardrobe, and it turns out he can't fit into the pants. Can't fit into the shirt. He's gained roughly 30 pounds. Was 170 in the last movie. He's roughly 200 right now. Elvis has been eating well, but I believe he also was waging an internal rebellion not to return to the set. And part of that rebellion was putting calories into his mouth he knew he shouldn't be eating, in addition to not moving himself through his normal weight loss regime. He had a specific way that he normally lost weight. And we heard him talk about it in a magazine. And he said that what he did was he just stopped eating between meals. And he ate regular meals, but they weren't extravagant. And he said that would drop the pounds off him. Now, we know from other accounts that we haven't been through together as a group, but probably a lot of us have read them, that Elvis had various diets that he would go on and try to lose weight as well. So he did battle weight all of his life, but he was very professional about it. And before he came back for a production, he made sure that he lost that weight. And this was the first time he had never done that. So there's more to this than just that Elvis was eating well. He was mentally rebelling against coming back to this movie, either consciously or subconsciously. And Keith is asking, how did Hollywood react to those letters from Dr. Nick? Well, we don't know specifically how they reacted. Obviously, they delayed the production. I mean, what else could they do? And here on the 6th, when Elvis leaves wardrobe, later that evening, he records the rest of the songs that he needs for the movie, the ones that he didn't get recorded during the Nashville production or Nashville recording session. And then perhaps on the 7th, but perhaps on the night of the 6th, or maybe even on the 8th, we don't really know. But Elvis received the script for the movie. So apparently he had not read this script, at least according to the sources that we're seeing. There's an indication, or maybe he'd already had the script and this was a new version, or he's now putting up another gripe because he's now in California where he can meet with these people in person. Not really sure. What we know is he's very unhappy with the script, and that the colonel and executives from the studio come to meet with him. Well, they may be unhappy with him already, but they come to his house. He doesn't go to see them. They come to see him. So no matter how they feel about it, they treat Elvis with a great deal of respect. And everyone recognizes that this is Elvis's show, that there is no money-making opportunity without Elvis. He's in a very strong position with them, but it is too late to make any changes to this script. It is simply too late. There's just not enough time. He understands that. He knows that. But he's very angry, and I believe I don't know what he expects, but I think he now expects that the next movie, at least, will be better. And maybe that's what they all walked away with. Again, we don't really know what their agreement was. We simply know that these people came to the house, and there was a meeting, and afterwards, it appeared things were moving forward. And Gunn is asking about one of the diets, and that was to make him sleep, wasn't it? So that's at a later point in time. That's during the Las Vegas years. And that's Dr. Ghanem. And he's another guy that gets conflated with Dr. Nick. But if you've been following the August 16th, 1977 mystery series, then we've met Dr. Ghanem, and we know he collected empty bottles of prescriptions that Elvis left laying around, apparently, that were from other doctors. So this doctor that is, I believe the doctor that's seeing Elvis in this event, Dr. Gorson, I think Ghanem had some of his prescription bottles, and I know for sure he had Dr. Nick's because we've done some deep looks at that. So Ghanem is a whole nother individual, but he builds a whole, like a room or addition onto his house just for Elvis, and this is where he gives him this sleep treatment, which is really he pumps him full. I think it's cortisone, but I can't remember for sure, so don't quote me on that. Talking about things I haven't prepped for this episode. But yeah, there is a terrible situation with that, and Dr. Nick is left to clean that situation up, which is basically that Elvis now has a need, a physical need, for these drugs that Dr. Ghanem used, and that they've had permanent side effects because they were used improperly on Elvis. But that's a whole different story, and maybe someday we'll cover that one too. And again, saying that because when you're asleep you can't eat, that was the theory, but when he woke up he was heavier than when he went to sleep, at least according to some of the reports. And there's like this episode, there's a bunch of people that talk about it, so that could be a really interesting one for us. But to get back to this calendar, to ground us again in March 1967, somewhere around the 6th, 7th, 8th, Elvis has this meeting, this kind of showdown, or perhaps a meeting of the minds, because we don't really know what happens behind these closed doors. What we know is that Elvis is the most important person because all of these people came to Elvis. They came to see him. This was a moment where he exercised power. And he demonstrated that power through summoning them to his presence, and they came. Employees can't summon their bosses, right? So this is all important to remember. There's a power structure here, and the power structure on paper puts the executives above Elvis, perhaps. They're really in an outside silo, but they're providing the money. And some people believe that the contract situations give the colonel an edge and put him in control. But when Elvis calls, everybody shows up. And then on the night of the 8th, moving into the morning of the 9th, so they've been doing pre-production on the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. We know Elvis was doing some wardrobe stuff, and then he did the songs on the 6th. We don't really know at this moment what he was doing on the 7th or the 8th, but we can probably guess that he was getting more wardrobe fittings. At some point, he collected pills from Max Shapiro. Now, he may not have done that personally. Don't know how he got these pills or what they were from Max, but they were to help him lose weight. So we can kind of assume that they're amphetamines of some kind. That was what Max preferred to prescribe to basically everyone for every problem. That was Max's specialty. So if Elvis was not taking amphetamines prior, he's definitely taking them on the 7th, the 8th, probably on the 6th. There's probably somebody went to Max on the 6th and got the pills because Elvis needed to take immediate action. And there's nothing illegal about anything that they would have done, and nothing immoral about it. The studio executives would surely have supported Elvis in taking these pills because he's not the only aging actor on the set or on a lot. They have been through this many, many times, not just with men, but also with women. So they have studio doctors, and one of the things those studio doctors do is they prescribe, probably for their patients, these stars on the lot, a lot of amphetamines in order to help them maintain a low weight. So this is nothing new or unexpected or out of the ordinary. This is not Elvis doing something different than everybody else. This is just part of being a movie star and losing weight. So he's losing weight. They're probably doing some set, maybe lighting blocking or maybe rehearsals of some read-throughs. He's probably meeting the co-stars. Things like that are happening on the 7th and the 8th. On the night of the 8th, he trips. And he hits his head. And he gets up in the morning of the 8th, or in the morning of the 9th, and what we've heard is that he wasn't out for breakfast. Larry Geller had arrived. He's not out for breakfast like he normally is. Nobody knows what's going on with him. Nobody's gone to check on him or anything. It's unclear if Priscilla's there. A couple of the accounts have Priscilla. They don't have anything she's saying. Somebody says that she finds Elvis unconscious. However, we know Elvis wasn't unconscious, so that casts doubt on that entire story. Elvis, according to multiple accounts, comes out on his own from the bedroom, holding his head, saying that he hit his head during the night, and now he doesn't feel good, and he thinks he needs a doctor. Yeah, and one account he did say, I think I need a doctor. So the guys are flustered, and they're not sure what to do, so they put Elvis back into bed. But they remain flustered and not sure what to do. None of them call the doctor, but Joe Esposito, he calls the colonel. Elvis isn't going to be able to report for work. So Joe calls the colonel. Colonel immediately comes over, assesses the situation, calls a doctor. That doctor brings in a specialist. That doctor is Elvis's regular doctor, Dr. Gorson. And Dr. Gorson brings in a friend who's a specialist, a radiologist, who has an x-ray machine. And he x-rays Elvis. And that's where we're at. And so we've referenced this contract crisis of 1967 that actually occurred in 1966 when Elvis signed the contracts, took effect January 1st, 1967. Colonel sent a follow-up letter on January 2nd, 1967. And this is the contract that references 50%. But in the details of the contract, it makes clear that it does not attach itself to revenue streams that are already in effect. Is the basic intent and effect of the contract. What Elvis makes already, they continue to split 25-75. If Elvis is involved in any projects that Elvis has to put effort into, like Elvis has to show up, even for a day, well then Elvis continues to make 75%. Colonel makes 25%. If this is a revenue stream, which the Colonel brought to the table, does not require Elvis to do anything. So this would be like merchandising pieces. If he's able to get replays or something off of old movies in new formats. Like we haven't hit VCR tapes yet. But if they had hit VCR tapes, then Colonel would have been able to make a deal. And then that deal he would have made 50% on because Elvis wasn't doing anything. So there's a lot on the table to be made. Of course, some of it, like those VCR, nobody even has any inkling VCRs are even coming, at least as a thing that regular people will be able to use, people who are not rich. So that's what this contract is. And one day we'll really get into a lot more detail about this contract, but it's not a straight, I now take 50%, as it appears on the slide, and as most of the public thinks about it. But the most important thing to remember for the purposes of this incident is that all the contract stuff, this contract, happened 2 months before. More than 2 months before this incident occurred. So there is no taking advantage of Elvis by forcing him to sign a new contract that changes their percentages. That's already happened. Billy Smith has told us that he's in the room and that he's in there for 10 days. No mention of Priscilla. And that's exactly where we're at right now. And then we're going to move on to the gentleman that we see on screen now, to the far right. That's Larry Geller. So we can see Colonel Parker, we can see Elvis, and we can see Larry Geller. Behind them is a car, and that is Elvis's gold Cadillac that was given to him by RCA, 24 karat gold Cadillac, customized by George Barris. Well, the reason they're standing in front of that car is we recently read an article out of a magazine that says Elvis cannot go to Australia, and here's the reasons why. And Colonel Parker told us that Elvis is too busy because he's making these movies. So Elvis can't go to Australia. But this car behind him, well, it can go on a world tour. And that's where the Colonel sends it. On a tour around the world and to Australia. So in December, or let me be clear, let me be more transparent, that I don't know exactly when it ends up in Australia, but there's an Australian magazine in December that prints an article that sounds as if it was there, right then. And of course, there's some publication delay, so it must have been a couple of weeks before. But sometime around November, December of 1967, this car that's behind Elvis and the Colonel and Larry is going to be in Australia. And a whole lot of people are going to travel in Australia to see this car. So that's a whole story by itself. But that means that I believe that this picture was taken towards the end of the month of April 1967. So it's a little bit in the future of what we're talking about right now on March 10th or March 9th. But I wanted you to be able to see Larry Geller and the Colonel and this car. And Linda is saying it seemed like Billy would not need to be in the room if Priscilla was. Sure seems that way. It seems like Elvis wouldn't have asked Billy to stay in the room if Priscilla was in there. I think, I don't know. Elvis did in the 70s often have Billy in the room while women were there. So it's not an unheard of thing, but I think it's kind of uncommon for the 60s. And Larry Geller says that when Elvis was finally permitted visitors, I came into his room and I sat on the bed. And the minute I saw him, I knew this wasn't Elvis. I mean, obviously it was Elvis, but he looked very strange. as if he were under the influence of something. And there's no doubt in my mind that he was drugged. For the first time in our relationship, he wasn't looking me in the eye. When I spoke to him, he looked at me as if he'd never seen me. So Elvis has had a head injury. Larry's talking about a time when Elvis has finally permitted visitors. Billy's told us he's been in there for 10 days straight, so we're assuming this is 10 days later. Let's go back to the calendar. So this happens on the 9th, and unfortunately I can't point on the screen for you, but you can see Thursday the 9th. And if we went down 10 days, I believe that would put us at the 19th, which is Sunday. So I think Larry's trying to tell us that he went in the room like on the 18th or the 19th. And that it appeared that Elvis was drugged. So we don't know if Elvis was prescribed anything. I'm sure his head hurt. So, and I don't know if 10 days later he'd still be taking something, but he was told to stay in bed for 2 weeks. So that would indicate there might be a prescription that would run for 2 weeks. And I think it's possible that prescription might make you groggy or sleepy or drugged. Not sure. It's just me guessing. When just from what's being said, but Larry seems to find it sinister that Elvis is under medication and that it's apparent he's taking medication. And he also takes it as kind of personal because Elvis won't look him in the eye and acts as if he'd never seen him. Now, I'm not sure what that means. That's some kind of emotional feeling on Larry's part. And I guess we could all imagine on our own what it would be like to have someone that we know very well treat us as if they'd never seen us. But I don't think we'd all think of that experience in exactly the same way. So to me, it's not clear what Larry's trying to tell us. You guys might have different thoughts. So if you do, feel free to put them into the chat. Put them into the comments below. Make sure that you like, subscribe, make sure that you have the bell on and there's not a line through it. And hopefully you'll be notified the next time I'm on live here on YouTube. Right now, doing the show every day at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'll be back on 24 hours from now. And make sure you tell everybody that you know that loves Elvis all about Hillbilly Cat history and to join us here for the lives, for the videos, for the shorts, for my posts. Make sure that you're checking the posts that I'm putting out this week. Putting out a lot of links to videos that aren't mine, but that reference back to things that we talk about. So I think you'll be interested in those. But to give back to Larry, Larry says Elvis's eyes were glazed. He was haunted looking. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Elvis's descent into experimenting with the next level of psychoactive medication, very heavy downers, and synthetic narcotics followed his recovery. Larry is linking later use of what I would assume are heavier sleeping pills, sleeping medication, than what Elvis has been using. And as we know, Elvis has always had difficulty sleeping. Downers put you to sleep. Narcotics are for pain. But if you have a lot of pain and you take narcotics, one of the side effects is you fall asleep a lot of times, especially if you're new to them. So I think both of these medications had an effect where he's falling asleep. And Larry's describing it to us. His eyes are glazed, haunted looking. I think that means his eyes are sunken in. He's got deep circles around his eyes, probably. I think for someone with a head injury, recovering from a head injury and sleeping most of the day, that's probably not completely an unexpected look. And to Larry's eye, Elvis was obviously drugged. But he's linking that when Elvis uses these drugs during this incident, that he's now discovered heavier drugs that are having a better effect. And then he begins to use them later. And I think there's probably a lot of truth in that. Elvis probably did experience different drugs at this moment, especially since they're having a pronounced effect and Larry can see it on him. They must be new to Elvis. And they're working, and we know he has a lot of trouble sleeping, so it wouldn't surprise me at all that, yes, he does use these later because they're very effective to make him sleep. And Linda is saying that Elvis was probably confused. I absolutely believe he was confused at this time, so somebody had to take over. The guys are very upset that it's the Colonel that's taking over, but Elvis is obviously in a, as they pointed out, and what they say the Colonel is taking advantage of, Elvis is in a weakened state of mind. He's had a head injury. The doctors have come and they have said he must have 2 weeks of rest. So they would concur that this is a bad time for Elvis to make any judgments. This is not a time for Elvis to depend on his mental faculties. He's got to offload that to somebody else. And in this power vacuum, or perhaps it's not a vacuum, because I think we probably all would agree that the Colonel in business is definitely the second in control, and many would say the first. So no power vacuum at all. The Colonel steps in and starts taking care of business. First order of business was to call a doctor. The second order of business is he's got to go take care of everything with the studios, and he's told the guys to make sure that somebody's with Billy, or somebody's with Elvis 24 hours a day, and that's now Billy. But more was going on there that the guys aren't really telling us, right? Like, so when Larry tells us that he walks in and he can see that Elvis is drugged, well, Larry's not the only person in the world that can walk into a room and see when somebody else is on drugs. So when the Colonel shows up, he's got more than 5 grown men who are flustered and unable to determine to call a doctor, even though one of them says Elvis himself said, "I need a doctor." And they've called the Colonel. So some people might say they didn't want to get in trouble with the Colonel, although they're quick to say that they didn't report to the Colonel, so they didn't care. Or that might still have an effect on them, and they still thought the best thing to do was to bring the Colonel in. Well, I think all of them, except for Joe Esposito, abdicated all responsibility. They gave it to Joe. Joe took it and gave it to the Colonel, because he called the Colonel in. Colonel calls in the doctor. But why is it that these gentlemen are unable to make a decision to call the doctor? Could it be that it's because they too are using the drugs that they're accusing Elvis of having used? Because we know that they were all doing these things together as a group. Now, all of them were using pills, especially amphetamines. And some of them had real problems with them. Like at this moment, we know that Marty Lacker has a problem because the colonel has already sent a letter to Marty Lacker telling him he knows he's got a pharmaceutical issue, and he's relieved him of access to the checkbook. And this is before Elvis made it to Clambake, according to Peter Guralnick. I haven't seen the letter myself. It's just what Peter reported. Pretty sure it's Peter. And so towards the end of this, because as I'm doing this live, there's sure to be mistakes that I make and things that I say that are wrong. So as we approach the end of our Circle G adventure, and even in the middle, like I'm bringing up this calendar now, there's going to be times where we reassess and we put everything in order and we actually say, this is who said this and when, so that we can see it all again in order and know just absolutely for certain. But I'm pretty sure it was Peter that I'm quoting, who's saying that Marty got this letter before, and therefore we can know that it's not just Marty using these drugs, but Larry, he's special. And why do the guys not like Larry? Some of it's money, but there's other reasons they don't like Larry too. Okay, and one of those reasons is drugs. And although they are using these pharmaceutical drugs, they're completely legal. They're getting them legally through doctors. And the medical community is basically supporting the use that these individuals are experiencing right now. Larry is doing street drugs. Larry brings in marijuana. Now today, we probably wouldn't see that as a big deal. But at that time, especially in Elvis's crew, it was a big deal. Now, Larry knew that Elvis didn't like marijuana. Or at least, he didn't like it to be around because it was illegal. Larry tells some stories about maybe some times that Elvis tried it. But overall, it's like alcohol. Elvis disapproves. He doesn't want it around. So Larry doesn't typically flaunt that he has it around. But Larry regularly uses it according to other people. And the colonel is able to discern this, just as he's able to discern that Marty's been using pharmaceuticals. So this is all behind the scenes and not talked about in any of these books, but it's going on because these are the habits of these individuals. And this is why the colonel is really irritated all the time at Larry when Larry's around. Because Larry brings a risk, a legal risk with him at all times. Because he has these habits that the other guys don't have, even though they have the effects of those habits. You know, but their habits aren't illegal at this time. So there's more tension here than what is brought to the surface of these books. And Gunn is saying that these guys were not liked by Parker, and that they were afraid of doing Parker's job. And Gunn's saying that the guys would not be afraid to call a doctor if the drugs were legal. And whose drugs are legal or not legal that they're afraid of? But whatever Elvis is on, they've already indicated it came from Max. And it's like right then, so it's got to be legal. Max is a licensed doctor who's giving you a true prescription. So it's possible that some of the guys had some illegal stuff. But I think it's more possible that they're under the influence at the moment, and now they're all flustered and don't know what to do. But I don't know. I'm not sure. It's just a theory I'm putting out there. Everybody can put out their own theories. My theory is simply based on what we know their personal habits to be. And they have talked about these habits in their books. They just don't line them up into these events. And Linda's saying it's not talked about in the books because they're busy blaming Elvis for everything in the books. Everything is Elvis-centric, and that's probably what we would expect as a reader. But that also makes all the bad, all the good and all the bad becomes Elvis-centric. And then Larry Geller says, well, I've skipped somebody here. Let's not skip anybody. On March 11th, 1967, Saturday, this is according to Sonny West. So Elvis fell on the 8th, late at night, and it was discovered early the morning of the 9th. A day has gone by. He's rested. It's now Saturday the 11th. And Sonny West, according to my notes here, Sonny detailed that date. That's where I'm getting this date from, March 11, 1967. And he says, Colonel Parker was most definitely not fine. After calling the studio to report that his star was going to be 2 weeks late in reporting to the set, Parker gathered the troops and laid down the law. Colonel said there are going to be major changes taking place around here. United Artists could tear up the contract they have with Elvis for this delay, and that could cost us millions. So I think the Colonel is referencing here that they're not only going to lose the money that they could make on this movie, there's possible legal consequences that could have financial impact on Elvis. He's not going to pay back millions, but he could definitely have a financial impact depending on how the contracts are structured. But he could potentially lose out on millions in the future because suddenly he's a major risk. He's no longer a sure bet. Now he's a loser. You put money into this, you might lose it. Nobody's going to put money into an Elvis that might lose money. So this is a dangerous time for Elvis in his career. The Colonel's very right about that. And so the Colonel has spent the last 2 days probably working out all the logistics to have everything delayed, to do everything that he can to help the studios and the money guys see this as little risk as possible, simply a delay. And Larry Geller says, 2 weeks after the incident, a meeting was called, and Parker sat beside Elvis, who was still propped up in his bed, still out to lunch. Now, the meeting Larry's referring to is this meeting. Now, Sonny says it's happening 2 days later on the 11th. And I think that fits a lot better than 2 weeks after the incident, which would put it at the 23rd or the 24th. That's even beyond Billy's timeline of 10 days. But I think we have to call into question Billy's timeline of 10 days as well, because Sonny's put an actual date on events and said the 11th. And so when I say Sonny has put a date on the events, the way the guys write these books is the same way that they give an interview. They tell you a story. Now, the story doesn't typically have dates with it, but they've told it to an author, and the author takes the story and they add the facts. Like, they figure out, oh, this happened on this date. this happened from other references that they have, hopefully. Especially when they put in a specific date. So my belief is that in Sonny West's book, the author has done some kind of research to find that date. And the research that he did, it's most likely he looked at Peter Guralnick's book, which also lists the date of March 11th, 1967. Now, how did Peter come to this determination? I'm not sure. But Peter is the top Elvis writer at this moment. I would definitely say he's number one. And he is just loaded and packed with facts. And not everything he says is correct, but he does put a massive amount of research into things. And one of his books is a day-by-day book that is nothing but this happened on this date. So we could probably put a lot of faith into this March 11th date. And hopefully we'll be able to match it up with other things that also give us faith. But that's kind of a behind-the-scenes look of how do we determine who's telling the truth here about this. Well, I think Larry's telling the truth, but he's telling an emotional truth. The facts are incorrect. Larry's author, whoever Larry told the story to and then rewrote it for the book, didn't do the fact checks, or at that point in time, I don't think Peter had published his book, so there was no book to go to pull the March 11th date from. But what Larry's saying is that Parker sat beside Elvis, who still was on the bed and still out to lunch. So if this was 2 weeks later, wow, that would be devastating. That Elvis has had this head injury and 2 weeks later, he's still out to lunch. Now to lunch is a American slang term to mean that Elvis is not all there in his head. He is still, he's not registering everything that's happening around him, is what Larry's saying. And Gunn is saying that there's so much trouble, and yet Clambake turned out to be such a lovely movie. And Linda's saying that she likes Clambake as well. But she does wish Elvis could have done the kind of movie he wanted. I think he really was going to in the 80s. Maybe even the late 70s. And Linda says that he could have if he'd had a different manager. But he usually took Parker's advice. And that wasn't always good for Elvis' creative side. I do agree that none of Parker's advice was good for Elvis's creative side, in the same way that I would say that none of Vernon's advice was good for Elvis's creative side. These gentlemen were much more conservative, and they were about keeping what they'd already earned and already had, and not about taking risk, which is what creativity is all about. So the Colonel, he liked sure bets, and so did Vernon. And these are the two gentlemen who are advising Elvis most closely throughout his entire career. And maybe that's what Elvis needed to hold him back, because he would have just been like a horse with no reins and just ran out there and ran till he collapsed. But maybe they held him too far back. I mean, that's definitely an argument we can make. And Gunn says that she's sure that Elvis could have been great in the movies that he wanted to and made them, because he proved it in a couple of his serious movies. And Marion's thanking me for explaining he was still out to lunch. Yeah, I have to remember that the American slang is not understood everywhere. But that's basically what Larry's trying to tell us, is that Elvis is still loopy. And of course he is. He got hit on the head 2 days ago. Now, 14 days ago, we should be very worried. But this is really 2 days ago. And so this makes a lot of sense. And Larry goes on to say, the Elvis I saw this day resembled a zombie. He sat there quietly, gazing down at the bed covers, never meeting my eyes. Larry's not going to like the outcome of this meeting that Colonel is about to have. And when Larry writes this, that meeting happened a long time ago, and Larry already knows the outcome. So when Larry writes that Elvis resembled a zombie, he's looking at it through the eyes of a person who experienced what's about to happen, which will be personal for him. But I also see in his description a man who's just had a head injury and is dazed and is unable to engage in the serious conversation that's actually happening in the room between a lot of grown men about their professional careers. And they're basically being chastised by, if this was a corporation, a man who's higher up within the organization because of what their irresponsibility, most likely through cords that are stretched all over the bathroom. And the fact, I think it's about the Colonel showing up and none of them being in a condition to make a decision to call for a doctor on their own and waiting for him. I think that really ticked him off. I don't know. Other people would interpret that differently. They would say that these guys were doing exactly what they were told to do, but none of them ever tell us that that's what they were instructed to do. They simply do not call the doctor, and they call the Colonel, and the Colonel calls the doctor. But there's still a lot more to this story, and we didn't even get to what the Colonel's laying down yet. And I hope you guys don't think that we're spending too long on this, or that we're stretched it out too much, but I think it really does deserve every minute of the discussion that we're putting into it. And so I'm so glad that you guys are here to go through it with me. And I'm going to leave you today with another song. And this one's going to be about, it's one of my newer ones just because I like it. And it's about the two cars, the one that Elvis bought for George Klein and the one that he gifted to Gary Pepper. And later this week, keep watching those posts because there's going to be some Gary Pepper posts come up. And I guarantee you guys are going to want to know what's said about Gary Pepper in those videos, and one of them tells us what happens to the car that Elvis gave him. And it also tells us what happens to Sterling, Gary's father, and also ultimately what happens to Gary. So watch for those posts. They're not my videos, and they've been out there for a while, but they're great videos about Gary. But this song is called Trust in Motion. And until I see you all again, you all keep on taking care of business.
Radio static, Memphis bound, WABQ homes a sacred sound. Green, green grass, again and again. The DJ's risk for a loyal the Chevy Impala, still shining new. Passed from Klein to the Circle G crew. Gary Pet for wheels instead of rails. Rode the